Welcome to HOA consequences. She treated my curb like a towable offense. You are obstructing the plow route, and the tow is the next step. That is what Ann Jackson screamed at me while I stood in my own driveway at 6 in the morning, holding a snow shovel, my breath fogging in the freezing air. She had a clipboard in one gloved hand and her phone in the other, filming me like I was committing a felony. The storm had dropped 8 inches overnight, and I had been out here for an hour, clearing a path wide enough for the visiting nurse, who was scheduled to arrive at 8. My driveway was the only safe place for her to park, because the street was a skating rink, and I was still recovering from shoulder surgery 3 weeks ago. Anne did not care. She jabbed a finger at the berm of snow I had pushed to the edge of my property line, and told me it was a violation of the Winter Maintenance Addendum, Section 4, Subsection C. I had never heard of Section 4, Subsection C. I asked her to show me the rule. She said I should have received the updated handbook in November, and my failure to review it was not her problem. Then she said the thing that would come back to destroy her. You will pay the fee, then you will pay the fee about the fee. She turned and walked toward her car, still filming over her shoulder. I live in Fairfax, Virginia, in a master-planned community called Forest Glen Property Owners Association, where the board runs snow patrol after every storm. I am a freelance photographer who owns legit camera gear, and I moved here 2 years ago because the rent was reasonable and the location worked for my clients. I did not know the HOA had a special assessment coordinator who treated winter like martial law. Anne was that coordinator. Middle-aged, red-haired, always in a blue puffer coat and a pink knit beanie, she carried a tow yard claim ticket booklet everywhere and flipped through it like a deck of cards when she wanted to intimidate someone. Her catchphrase was burned into my brain already. You do not shovel to my standard, you pay to my standard. She had said it to me twice in December when I cleared my walkway after a smaller storm, and she decided the corners were not sharp enough. I had laughed it off then. I was not laughing now. She climbed into her car and drove off, leaving me standing in the cold with my shoulder aching and a visiting nurse on the way. I went inside, grabbed my phone, and opened the HOA portal to look for this winter maintenance addendum she kept citing. The portal had a document section, but the only handbook was from 2019. I searched for updates. Nothing. I checked my email. Nothing. I called the management company, a third-party firm called Piedmont Property Services, and got voicemail. I left a message asking for a copy of the current winter rules and went back outside to finish shoveling. The nurse arrived at 8. I met her at the driveway and helped her navigate the cleared path to my front door. She checked my shoulder, changed the dressing, and told me I was healing well, but I needed to avoid heavy lifting for another 3 weeks. I told her I had just shoveled 8 inches of snow because the HOA was threatening to tow my car if I did not clear the driveway. She shook her head and said that sounded illegal. I said I was starting to think the same thing. She left at 8:30, and I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop. I opened my email and saw a new message from Piedmont Property Services. The subject line was Winter Compliance Notice. I opened it. The message was 2 sentences. Your property has been documented as non-compliant with Forest Glen snow removal standards per the updated handbook distributed in November 2024. A fine of $75 has been assessed and is due within 10 days. I checked the date on the email. It had been sent at 6:15 this morning, 15 minutes after Anne had screamed at me in my driveway. I scrolled down looking for an attachment or a link to the updated handbook. Nothing. I hit reply and typed a polite message asking for a copy of the handbook and clarification on what made my driveway non-compliant. I sent it and waited. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "This is Ann Jackson, Forest Glen Snow Patrol. You have been issued a second violation for failure to maintain safe de-icing on your walkway. Photographic evidence attached." The attachment was a photo of my front steps, taken from an angle that made it look like I had not salted at all. I had salted. I had used an entire bag of ice melt on those steps. The photo was cropped tight, and the lighting was dim, but I could see the faint white granules if I zoomed in. I did not reply. I saved the photo and opened my own camera roll. I had taken a picture of my steps at 6:45, right after I finished salting, because I had a feeling Ann was going to pull something like this. My photo showed the steps clearly covered in ice melt, the granules visible in the early light, the timestamp in the corner reading 6:45. I did not send it to her. I saved it in a folder labeled HOA evidence and went back to waiting for a reply from the management company. By noon, Piedmont had not replied. I called again and got a different voicemail. I left a second message, this time mentioning that I had not received the November handbook and needed it before I could comply with rules I had never seen. I went outside to check the mailbox. Inside was a bright orange windshield sticker, the kind tow companies use, folded in half. I unfolded it. The word Violation was printed in bold block letters at the top, and below it was a handwritten note. Final warning: snow obstruction. Tow authorized if not corrected by 5 p.m. today. No signature, no contact info, no explanation of what needed to be corrected. I looked at my driveway. It was clear. I looked at the berm I had pushed to the property line. It was snow. It was my property. I took a photo of the sticker and added it to the evidence folder. Then I walked next door and knocked. My neighbor, a calm middle-aged guy named Tom, opened the door holding a coffee mug. He saw my face and said, "Let me guess. Ann." I nodded. He sighed and said, "Come in." Tom was tired of Ann. He told me she had been running the Winter Safety Committee like a private police force, with no authority for the past 2 years, ever since the board created the Special Assessment Coordinator position and handed it to her. He said she had targeted at least a dozen residents, always with the same pattern: vague accusations, no clear standards, escalating fines, and threats of towing or liens if you pushed back. He said she had gotten away with it because most people just paid the fines to make her go away. He said he had tried to raise concerns at a board meeting last year, and Ann had spent 15 minutes publicly shaming him in front of 40 neighbors, accusing him of trying to undermine community safety. He said the board had done nothing. I asked him if he would be willing to be a witness if I needed one. He said yes, immediately. He said he would even testify if it came to that, because someone needed to stop her before she ran everyone out of the neighborhood. I thanked him and went home. At 4:30, a tow truck pulled up in front of my house. I walked outside. The driver, a young guy in a heavy jacket, was standing by my car with a clipboard. I asked him what he was doing. He said he had a work order from Forest Glen HOA to tow a vehicle for snow obstruction. I asked him to show me the work order. He handed me the clipboard. The order had my address, my license plate, and a note that said obstruction of plow route, resident non-compliant, authorization per Ann Jackson. I told him there was no obstruction. I told him my driveway was clear and my car was parked legally on my own property. He shrugged and said he just did what the work order told him. I asked him if he had verified the obstruction before hooking up my car. He said that was not his job. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation. The dispatcher said an officer would be out within 30 minutes, and I should not let the driver tow the car until the officer arrived. I told the driver to wait. He said he could not wait that long. I said if he hooked up my car before the police arrived, I would file a theft report. He hesitated, then called his supervisor. I heard him say something about a dispute and a resident refusing to release the vehicle. He hung up and told me his supervisor said to wait for the police. We stood in the driveway in the falling snow for 20 minutes. The officer arrived at 5. I explained the situation again, showed him the orange sticker, the work order, and the photos I had taken of my cleared driveway. He looked at the tow truck driver and asked if he had verified an obstruction. The driver said no. The officer told him he could not tow a legally parked vehicle without an actual obstruction, and this was a civil HOA matter, not a criminal issue. The driver packed up his gear and left. The officer turned to me and said I should document everything and consider getting a lawyer if the HOA kept harassing me. He gave me an incident number and said I could reference it if I needed to file a complaint. I thanked him and went inside. My shoulder was throbbing and my hands were numb. I sat down and started typing an email to the management company with the incident number attached. Before I could finish, my phone buzzed. Another text from Anne. You have now obstructed an authorized tow and interfered with HOA enforcement. An additional fine of $150 has been assessed. I did not reply. I did not raise my voice, because my proof was louder than any argument. That night, I stayed up late reviewing everything I had. Photos of my driveway at multiple timestamps. Photos of my steps with visible ice melt. The orange sticker. The tow work order. The incident number from the police. The texts from Anne. The emails from Piedmont with no handbook attached. I organized it all into a single folder and backed it up to the cloud. Then I did something I had been holding off on. I called a friend who worked in insurance risk management and asked her if an HOA could be held liable for harassment claims. She said absolutely, especially if the harassment was documented and involved threats or false accusations. She said most HOA policies had coverage for board liability, but insurers hated harassment claims because they were hard to defend and expensive to settle. She said if I could prove a pattern of bad faith enforcement, the HOA's insurer might pressure them to back off. I asked her how I would prove that. She said, get the vendor reports, get the board meeting minutes, and get anything that showed Anne was acting outside her authority. I thanked her and hung up. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with Piedmont Property Services. I attached all my evidence and requested copies of the November handbook, the board resolution that created the snow patrol position, and any vendor contracts related to towing or snow removal. I CC'd the HOA board president and the treasurer. Then I filed a second complaint with the Virginia Common Interest Community Board, the state agency that regulates HOAs. I referenced the incident number from the police and outlined Anne's pattern of vague accusations, missing documentation, and retaliation. I requested an investigation. Then I waited. 2 days later, I got a reply from Piedmont. The message was 3 sentences. We are reviewing your complaint and will respond within 10 business days. In the meantime, all fines remain due. Please remit payment to avoid further action. I did not pay. I replied asking again for the November handbook and the board resolution. No response. That same afternoon, Anne showed up at my door. I opened it, and she was standing on my porch with her phone out, filming. She said I was in violation of the guest parking policy because my visiting nurse had parked in a guest spot instead of my driveway. I told her the guest spot was the closest accessible space, and my driveway was still being cleared when the nurse arrived. Anne said the rule was clear, and I was responsible for directing my guests to compliant parking. I asked her to show me the rule. She said it was in the handbook. I said I had never received the handbook. She said that was not her problem, and walked away. I closed the door and added the interaction to my evidence file. That night, my next-door neighbor, Tom, knocked on my door. He handed me a manila folder. Inside were printed emails between Anne and the management company, going back 6 months. He said he had gotten them through a records request after Anne had targeted him last year. The emails showed a pattern. Anne would send photos of minor violations, demand immediate fines, and pressure the management company to authorize towing or liens. In multiple emails, the management company pushed back, saying the violations were not clear or the fines were excessive. In one email, Anne wrote, "If you do not back me up, I will take this to the board and you will lose the contract." The management company caved every time. Tom said he had tried to use the emails at the board meeting, but the board president shut him down and said the meeting was not the place for personal grievances. He said he gave up after that because he did not have the energy to fight. He said if I was willing to push harder, he would back me up. I told him I was. I scanned every page in the folder and added it to my evidence file. Then I opened my laptop and started drafting a formal demand letter. I was not a lawyer, but I had done enough contract work to know how to write something that sounded serious. I outlined every violation of procedure, every missing document, every threat, and every instance of retaliation. I cited the state HOA statutes on fair enforcement and due process. I demanded an immediate halt to all fines, a refund of any fees already collected, and a written apology. I said if the HOA did not respond within 7 days, I would file a lawsuit for harassment, bad faith enforcement, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I did not send it yet. I needed one more piece of evidence. The next day, I called the gate system vendor, a local tech company that maintained the neighborhood entry gates and access logs. I explained that I was a resident dealing with an HOA dispute, and I needed a report showing my entry and exit times for the past 2 weeks. The rep said they could not release that without HOA authorization. I said I was requesting it as a resident under my right to access community records. She said she would check with her supervisor and call me back. 2 hours later, she called and said they could provide a basic log, but it would take 3 business days and cost $50. I paid with a credit card and waited. While I waited, another storm rolled in. This one was worse, 12 inches overnight and ice underneath. I could not shovel. My shoulder was still recovering, and the doctor had told me to avoid heavy lifting. I hired a snow removal service to clear my driveway. They showed up at 7 in the morning with a plow truck and knocked it out in 20 minutes. I paid them in cash and went back inside. At 8, Anne was at my door. She was holding her phone and filming again. She said I had hired an unauthorized contractor and violated the vendor approval policy. I told her there was no vendor approval policy in the handbook I had received. She said the updated handbook required all contractors to be pre-approved by the board to ensure insurance and bonding. I said I had been asking for the updated handbook for a week and no one had provided it. She said my failure to obtain the handbook did not excuse the violation. Then she said the thing that made me smile. You will pay the fee, then you will pay the fee about the fee. I thanked her for reminding me and closed the door. 2 days later, the gate vendor report arrived by email. It was a simple spreadsheet showing every time my car had entered or exited the neighborhood gates for the past 2 weeks. I opened it and started cross-referencing it with Anne's violation notices. On December 10th, she had texted me saying I left my trash cans out past 8 in the morning, creating a hazard. The gate log showed I had exited the neighborhood at 6:45 that morning and did not return until noon. I could not have left the cans out because I was not home. On December 14th, she had emailed saying I failed to clear my walkway within 12 hours of the storm ending. The storm had ended at 2 in the morning. The gate log showed I had exited at 6:30 the previous evening for a client shoot and did not return until 10 the next morning. I had cleared the walkway within 2 hours of getting home. She had lied. She had lied multiple times. I saved the gate report and added it to my evidence file. Then I opened the demand letter I had drafted and attached the report with a note. This report proves multiple false accusations and establishes a pattern of bad faith enforcement. I printed the letter, signed it, and mailed it certified to the HOA board, the management company, and Anne personally. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmares that end with justice served. 3 days later, I got a call from the HOA board president, a retired accountant named Gerald. He said he had received my letter and wanted to discuss it in person. I said I was happy to meet, but I wanted Tom present as a witness. He agreed. We met at the clubhouse the next afternoon. Gerald brought the treasurer, a quiet woman named Linda. Anne was not there. Gerald started by saying the board took my concerns seriously and wanted to resolve the matter amicably. I said that was great, and I wanted to start by seeing the November handbook. He paused, then said there was no November handbook. The board had discussed updating the winter rules but had not finalized or distributed anything. I asked why Anne had been citing it for weeks. He said Anne had been working from a draft and may have misunderstood the approval process. I said that sounded like a lie. Linda shifted in her seat. Gerald said the board would issue a clarification and suspend any fines related to the draft rules. I said that was a start, but I also wanted an apology and a refund of the $75 fine I had already paid under protest. He said the board would discuss it. I said I also wanted to know who authorized Anne to coordinate with the tow company and issue work orders without verifying violations. Gerald said the board had granted Anne limited enforcement authority as part of her coordinator role. I pulled out the gate vendor report and slid it across the table. I said this report proved Anne had issued at least 2 false violations, and I wanted to know what the board was going to do about it. Linda picked up the report and read it. Her face went pale. Gerald cleared his throat and said the board would need to review the report and consult with legal counsel. I said that was fine, and I would wait 7 days for a written response before filing my lawsuit. I stood up and left. That night, Anne called me. I did not answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was shaking. She said I was making a big mistake and the board would not tolerate my attacks on her integrity. She said if I continued to interfere with her duties, she would personally ensure I was removed from the community. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Gerald and the management company with a note. This is retaliation, and it is escalating. I expect a response. The next morning, I got an email from Piedmont Property Services. The subject line was, "Immediate suspension of enforcement." The message said all pending fines had been suspended pending board review, and Ann Jackson had been placed on administrative leave from her coordinator role. It said the board would meet in 2 weeks to discuss policy changes, and my complaint would be addressed at that meeting. I felt a flicker of hope, but I did not relax. I knew Ann was not done. 2 days later, I found out I was right. I was at the gas station filling up my car when Ann pulled into the pump behind me. She got out, walked over, and started filming me. She said I was illegally idling my vehicle in a public space, and she was documenting it for the Environmental Compliance Committee. I stared at her. I said we were not in the neighborhood. She said she was a concerned citizen, and she could film whatever she wanted. I said that was fine, and I pulled out my phone and started filming her. She stepped closer and said I was harassing her. I said she had followed me to a gas station to film me pumping gas, and I was documenting her behavior for my lawsuit. She said I had no proof she followed me. I smiled. I opened my photos and showed her a screenshot of the gate log with my exit timestamp from 15 minutes ago. Then I showed her a second screenshot of the same log showing her exit timestamp 3 minutes later. Then I showed her my dashcam footage showing her car 2 vehicles behind me on the road. I said I had her timeline, her route, and her on video. She turned white. She put her phone away and walked back to her car without another word. I finished pumping gas, got in my car, and drove home. I uploaded the dash cam footage and the gate log screenshots to my evidence folder. Then I sent an email to Gerald and Piedmont with the subject line "Additional Evidence of Stalking and Harassment." I attached everything and wrote, "Ann Jackson followed me to a public location to film me in an attempt to create a new violation. This is escalation, and it is illegal. I expect immediate action." That night, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. I answered. A man introduced himself as Peter Caldwell, the attorney for Forest Glen Property Owners Association. He said he had been retained to review my complaint and advise the board. He said he had seen my evidence and he wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss a resolution. I said I was open to that, but I wanted Tom present and I wanted everything in writing. He agreed. We scheduled the meeting for 3 days later at the clubhouse. The morning of the meeting, I got an email from Piedmont. The subject line was policy update and board action. The message said the board had voted to dissolve the special assessment coordinator position effective immediately. It said Ann Jackson was no longer affiliated with any HOA enforcement role and had been issued a no-contact directive by the management company. It said all fines issued under the draft winter rules had been voided, and refunds would be processed within 30 days. I read it twice to make sure I was not imagining it. Then I called Tom and told him the news. He laughed and said it was about time. The meeting with the attorney was short. Peter Caldwell was a sharp guy in his 50s, and he did not waste time. He said the board had reviewed all my evidence and determined that Ann had acted outside her authority on multiple occasions. He said the board was concerned about liability, especially given the stalking incident and the false violations. He said the board was prepared to offer a settlement. I asked what the settlement included. He slid a document across the table. It outlined a full refund of all fees I had paid, including the $75 fine and the $50 gate report fee. It included a written apology from the board. It included a commitment to revise the winter enforcement policy with resident input. And it included a clause that Ann Jackson would have no contact with me or my property, and any future violations would require third-party verification before fines could be assessed. I read it carefully. Tom read it over my shoulder. I asked if the settlement included a non-disparagement clause. Peter said it did not. I asked if I was free to share my story. He hesitated, then said yes, as long as I did not defame anyone. I said I would not need to defame anyone because I had the facts. I signed the settlement. Tom signed as a witness. 2 weeks later, I got a check in the mail for $125. A refund of fees that hit the ledger like a slap. The same day, I got a formal letter from the board apologizing for the enforcement errors and thanking me for bringing the issues to their attention. I framed the letter and hung it in my office. A week after that, Tom knocked on my door and handed me a printout. It was an email chain he had received from a friend on the board. The email chain included a message from the HOA's insurance carrier. The subject line was coverage review and recommendations. The message said the insurer had been notified of harassment claims and advised the board to cease all enforcement actions by Ann Jackson immediately to reduce liability exposure. The message said continued harassment could result in a policy cancellation or a substantial rate increase. Tom said that was the real reason the board moved so fast. I said I did not care what the reason was, as long as it worked. The next storm came in February. I hired the same snow removal service to clear my driveway. No one said a word. I salted my steps and took photos with timestamps, just in case. No one challenged me. I parked in a guest spot when my shoulder was too sore to walk the extra distance. No one filmed me. The orange windshield stickers disappeared. The tow truck never came back. In March, the board held a special meeting to revise the winter enforcement policy. Tom and I attended. The new policy was clear. All violations required photographic evidence with timestamps. All fines required third-party verification before assessment. All residents had the right to appeal within 30 days. The board voted unanimously to adopt it. Ann did not attend the meeting. I heard from Tom that she had resigned from the board entirely and moved out of the neighborhood 2 months later. I never saw her again. The tow vendor that Ann had coordinated with lost the HOA contract after the board reviewed the work orders and found multiple unauthorized tows. The vendor refunded every charge from the winter crackdown, including the fees for the attempted tow on my car. The board issued a newsletter in April summarizing the policy changes and thanking residents for their patience during the transition. The newsletter did not mention Ann by name, but everyone knew. Tom said at least 3 other residents had come forward with their own evidence of false violations after my settlement became public. The board settled with all of them quietly. I kept my evidence folder backed up and organized, just in case. I kept the incident number from the police. I kept the gate vendor report. I kept the photos, the emails, the texts, and the voicemail. I kept the framed apology letter on my wall. By summer, the neighborhood felt different. The board started holding open forums where residents could ask questions and raise concerns without fear of retaliation. The management company replaced the old voicemail system with a direct email line that actually got responses. The new enforcement policy was printed in the updated handbook, which was finally distributed in May. I read it cover to cover. It was reasonable. It was clear. It was nothing like the draft Ann had been citing. Tom and I became friends. We met for coffee once a week and traded stories about the old HOA drama. He said he was glad someone had finally stood up to Ann because he had been too worn down to do it himself. I said I was glad he had given me the email folder, because without that I would have had a much harder time proving the pattern. He said we made a good team. I agreed. In August, I got a call from a woman named Lisa, who lived 3 streets over. She said she had heard about my settlement, and she was dealing with a similar issue involving the landscaping committee. She asked if I would be willing to share my evidence template and walk her through the process. I said yes, and I sent her everything. 2 months later, she won her case. The landscaping committee chair resigned. The board revised the landscaping policy the same way they had revised the winter policy. Lisa sent me a thank you card. She said I had started a quiet revolution in the neighborhood, and people were not afraid of the board anymore. I did not feel like a revolutionary. I felt like someone who had been pushed too far and decided to push back with the only tool that mattered: the paper trail, the facts, the timestamps, the insurance leverage, the gate vendor report that proved Anne had lied, the attorney's calculation that defending harassment claims would cost more than settling, the refund that hit the ledger like a slap, the no-contact directive that ended Karen's reign, the HOA attorney who forced a reversal to reduce liability. I kept going back to that moment at the gas station when I showed Anne her own timeline and watched her face go white. That was the moment I knew I had won. Not because I had destroyed her, but because I had trapped her with her own rules, her own behavior, her own obsession with documentation. She had filmed everything, texted everything, emailed everything, and I had kept everything. The Forest Glen Property Owners Association still exists. The board still meets monthly. The rules are still enforced. But the enforcement is fair now. It is transparent. It is accountable. Residents know their rights. They know how to request records. They know how to appeal. And they know that if they document everything, they can win. I still live in the neighborhood. I still shovel my driveway when it snows. And I still take photos with timestamps. Not because I am paranoid, but because I learned that proof is power. The HOA sent out a new handbook last November, 1 year after Anne had started citing the phantom draft. The new handbook included a section on resident rights and due process. It included contact information for the State Common Interest Community Board. It included a clause that said residents could not be fined for violations they had not been properly notified of. I read that clause and thought about the orange windshield sticker, the texts with no explanation, the emails with no handbook attached. I thought about the tow truck in my driveway, the driver with the clipboard, the officer who told me to document everything. I thought about Tom handing me the email folder. I thought about the gate vendor report. I thought about the attorney who said the insurer wanted the harassment to stop. I thought about Anne saying, "You will pay the fee, then you will pay the fee about the fee." She had been so sure, so confident, so certain that she could bully me into submission with vague rules, shifting standards, and the threat of escalating consequences. She had done it to Tom. She had done it to a dozen other residents. She had gotten away with it because no one had the time, the evidence, or the willingness to fight back hard enough. But I had time. I had evidence. And I had a shoulder injury that made me desperate enough to dig in and refuse to move. That desperation had saved me. The visiting nurse, the narrow window for safe access, the knowledge that I could not afford to lose my parking or my driveway. Those stakes had forced me to document everything from the start, to call the police, to get the incident number, to request the gate report. Without those stakes, I might have just paid the $75 fine and moved on. But I could not move on. I could not afford to. And that had made all the difference. The board president, Gerald, retired last spring. Linda, the treasurer, took over. She is fair, methodical, and she actually reads the emails residents send. The management company hired a new community manager who returns calls within 24 hours. The tow vendor was replaced by a company that requires written verification before they hook up any vehicle. The neighborhood has a new gate technician, a young guy with a tool bag who walks the property every morning checking for issues. I see him sometimes when I am leaving for a shoot. He waves. I wave back. He has no idea that his company's log was the thing that broke Anne's credibility. I thought about telling him once, but I decided it would be awkward. Some victories are private. Tom still lives next door. We still have coffee once a week. Last month, he told me the board was discussing a policy change that would require all enforcement coordinators to have formal training and certification. He said it was a direct result of the Anne Jackson disaster. He said the board did not want to repeat that mistake. I said that sounded like progress. He said it was, but progress was slow and the neighborhood still had a long way to go. I agreed. But I also knew that every inch of progress mattered, because every inch made it harder for the next Anne Jackson to take over. I still get emails from Piedmont Property Services. They are boring now. Reminders about community events, notifications about scheduled maintenance, updates on landscaping contracts, no violation notices, no fine assessments, no threats. The emails sit in my inbox and I delete them without stress. That is the real victory. Not the settlement check, not the apology letter, not the policy changes. The real victory is the absence of fear. The knowledge that I can shovel my driveway, salt my steps, park in a guest spot, and hire a contractor without worrying that someone is watching, filming, and waiting to pounce. I do not miss the adrenaline of the fight. I do not miss the late nights organizing evidence or the tight feeling in my chest every time I saw Anne's car. But I am glad I fought. I am glad I documented everything. I am glad I did not pay the fee about the fee. I am glad I trapped her with her own timeline at that gas station and watched her realize she had been caught. I am glad the insurer said stop. I am glad the attorney forced a reversal. I am glad Karen got a no-contact directive. I am glad the refund hit the ledger like a slap. Those are the moments that made it worth it. The last time I saw anything related to Anne was in June, 6 months after the settlement. I was at the hardware store buying paint when I saw a woman who looked like her from behind. Same red hair, same build. My stomach tightened for a second. Then she turned around, and it was not her. I exhaled and realized I had been holding my breath. That was when I knew the fight was really over. Not because Anne was gone, but because I was no longer afraid of seeing her. I finished my shopping and drove home. The neighborhood looked different in summer. Green lawns, blooming flowers, kids riding bikes. No snow, no ice, no orange stickers. The clubhouse parking lot where the tow truck had idled in the falling snow was empty except for a few cars belonging to residents at the pool. I parked and walked inside to drop off a form for the community newsletter. The new manager, a friendly woman named Rachel, thanked me and asked if I was planning to attend the next board meeting. I said I would if there was anything worth discussing. She said the board was voting on the enforcement training policy and they wanted resident input. I said I would be there. She smiled and said she was glad the neighborhood had people like me who were willing to stay engaged. I did not tell her that I had not wanted to be engaged. I had wanted to shovel my driveway in peace. But sometimes you do not get to choose your battles. Sometimes the battles choose you. And when they do, the only thing that matters is whether you have the evidence, the patience, and the willingness to see it through. I had all three, and that was enough. Thank you for spending your time with me.